opening today are going to try to prove to you that firstly, faith has no place in education, and faith should not be we should not be educating our children based on religious schools at all and completely ban them in our society. Right? So firstly, I'm going to characterize what exactly faith-based schools result in, and also explain to you the impacts of those faith-based schools that bring to society as a whole. Right? So firstly, we believe as an opening government team, right, that we believe that faith-based schools are not an alternative to public schools. In this situation, we believe in Western and liberal democracies, right? We believe that they have sufficient funding to provide for education, and we believe that religious schools are, well, religious funding is not as necessary as the opposition would try to convince you. It's simply because democracies are already developed, and these democracies has already developed, and that they have sufficient funding so that they would be able to provide for the nation's future in the first place. Right? So in this situation, we believe that faith-based schools will only create an echo chamber. Right? So let me first characterize what exactly is an echo chamber. So you are trying to put a bunch of people from the same religious backgrounds, right? And then after that, put them in a school, and the teacher will teach them everything about religion. They'll be teaching based on religion, and these children will be subconsciously accepting religion based on their education. Not only that, these echo chambers also accept donations from religious groups and societies, and are reliant on them on operating. So that means that they'll be operating on the religious group's interests in the first place, right? So, and not only that, people in power are from the people in power, like for example, the headmaster, the principals, or the head teachers, etc., would be from religious backgrounds in the first place. That means that if you were to send your child to a religious school, you cannot escape the grasp of being educated on this religion in the first place, right? So why is it bad for the children in the first place? Well, we believe that children can be split into two groups, right? There are children who go to school purely for education, and there are children who go to these religious schools because it supports their religion, and they want a school that can teach them more about religion, and also teach them be more closer to her. Right. So we are going to explain why we impact by banning faith-based schools in the first place. We will be advocating for those children in need of education, right? Yes.
Doesn't liberalism and democratic principles require that everyone have the equal opportunity to set up a school?
But then the problem is that with that equal opportunity, right? But you cannot, even with equal opportunity, you cannot escape that faith-based schools will have. If you allow faith-based schools in the first place, these equal chambers will happen, right? Because you take, for example, if you were to go to the Christian Union and study starts from Muslim ideology. Right, so everyone will be ostracizing you. Everyone would try to leave you out of the conversation. And in that situation, it's not likely that you'll be able to accept any other ideologies when in a religious school, simply because you'll be ostracized and you'll be left out by the entire school, because the entire school is majority of their religion in the first place, right? So firstly, we believe that in a religious school, our children's ideas will be less challenged in the first place, and this will result in digression in our society as in our democracy in the first place. Right? Let me explain. So, firstly, we believe that critical thinking for children is the most important. Children need critical thinking in the first place so that they can advance our society, and so that they can fully develop into mature human beings. And in this situation, right, we believe that critical thinking would, and we believe that religious schools in this situation would decrease the amount of critical thinking, because firstly, you are closed off from other faiths, closed off from other religions. The odds of you interacting with other people outside of your ethnicity, right? Take, for example, you go to a Christian school, odds of them being majority white Christians would incredibly likely, simply because that's the majority Christians in the first place. And in that situation, you are closed off to thinking the same way that they do, right? So that means that you're not opening up to like what different ideologies are talking about. You're not opening up to what other races experience. And in that situation, you are decreasing your critical thinking in terms of in terms of the world, for sake of just learning about their religion and believing that religion. Right. So not only that, we believe that it also has a role effect in terms of tolerance, right? Because note that here, if you are in a very limited and closed off group, it's very difficult to understand what others are feeling, and especially from other races, other ethnicities, etc. You will be hard pressed to understand. It's nearly impossible if you were in a closed off community like this, right? And the problem is that democracies depend on empathy. Our democracy depends on we are uplifting minority groups, and that we believe that we should give them a chance, and on that vote not only in our best interest, in their best interest as well. So take for example, one part of how democracy might be going wrong is how right-wing groups will spread hate against minority groups, and thus advocate against democracy because they want to be obviously. But as a result, we believe that because of this, democracy is harmed simply because people cannot understand. People from religious schools cannot understand that the worldview from another perspective. Right? So in this situation, you will result in advocating for world leaders who are less empathetic to other situations, who are less empathetic to minority groups, and as a result, who will try to regress the country and try to suppress these minority groups. And we believe that this is a net harm to our society, and thus I rest my case. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for a fine speech. Next, I'd like to invite the leader of opposition to communicate the opposition side. Here.
I want to start off with an observation. Western liberal democracies are quite often not liberal and quite often also not democracies. And I want to start off with that observation because racism is at almost record highs. If you compare this with the last decade or even the decade before that, for a couple of reasons. I think you can already take the 7th of October attacks by Hamas, how that's led to a rise in anti-Semitism across Europe, but also the rise of Islamophobia across Europe. But it's not like this is just new. Even beforehand, we're seeing the rise of right-wing parties across the Netherlands, for instance, France, Germany, the United Kingdom. All of this is important because if you are going to ban religious schools, there must be language accompanying that ban, and we will talk about the effects of that on the public discourse, but also the effects that this will have on children from minority groups. Before I move on to all of that, I just want to rebut a few general things that come out of opening government. The first thing they say is, oh, well, these schools are really fucked up because, they get donations from religious groups, people in power from religious background. I would just note that one, the state has control of the curricula, largely, that these schools are teaching. If that is fucked up, then the state is fucked up. I can't do much about that. And the second thing I want to know is, if there is a problem, I think there is a significant problem with state resources going to these religious communities, I think it's not fund them, but banning them is an entirely different proposition altogether. We don't really necessarily see why funding needs to go up either. I'm going to talk about a few things in this speech. We might add a couple of things on our own. Just around one, why does it make life for the students much worse across the board, and that's not something that we're going to take up. Secondly, I'm going to talk about just a general problem with this in public discourse and what this cause is. Let's just quickly start off with the first idea, but within that, let's just quickly ask, what is school meant to do? and what is achieving that generally required in terms of structural requirements of school. I think it's fairly clear to see that school is generally a place where you focus on improving the learning and educational outcomes for children, for students. Generally, those are connected to life chances. So ideally, you want students who are well educated, at least borderline educated, who have maybe access to university or at the minimum access to a job after the school is done. But the second thing is school is also a place where you socialize with people, make friends, and also do extracurricular activities that are not related to learning outcomes. For instance, debating. Within that, I think there is one structural requirement for all of this to go down well, which is children must feel safe and they must feel comfortable. Now, this might not happen in all instances, i.e., everyone's had or seen some instance of bullying across the board, but that does mean that structurally the school tries to prevent that as much as possible, and the system doesn't allow for something like this to happen structurally. I think this policy completely changes that. But before that, I want to quickly talk about the kind of schools that will be most affected by this policy. What we're thinking of are largely schools that are built for minority students. Largely, these would be schools that are built for Jewish students, or schools that are built for Muslim students across, Europe in general or America. And there's many of these out there. And who really goes to these schools? I think most of the people that go to these schools would be second generation immigrants, maybe, or even first generation immigrants. People who are new to the country, alien to the environment, or just generally treated as aliens by others. These people largely already live in ethnic enclaves across the board. If you just go to London, if you are in London, you probably see that there are ethnic enclaves South Asian all across the board. There are other similar ethnic enclaves for other minority groups as well. Which means that the reason that these schools are fake is, one, new parents or new immigrants to this country believe that their kids will generally be educated in line with their values, which is extremely important to them. Two, they believe that they will meet kids from similar backgrounds, similar beliefs, similar values, and similar actions, etc., so that their kids will be able to make friends. I think the fact of the matter is, when you ban this, these kids are largely going to go to public schools because we don't really necessarily conceive of these kids as going to very posh, fancy private schools. Like, even in some instances, they might be able to. But regardless of that, I think what you're pushing that into is a public school or a public environment where generally they will be met with a lot of discrimination. And there are a couple of structural reasons for why they will be met with a lot of discrimination. I think the first thing is, given the fact that they're new, I'll take you in a second, given the fact that they are new to the country and they are new to values, I think that gives you a clear target for where to go and what to do. If they do anything odd that is part of their culture, their values, that will be nitpicked on, and we know that kids can be pro-monsters. But before that, I'll take those in.
Look, is it easier for the far right to galvanise hatred against religious minorities when they're an obscure and foreign ethnic enclave, or when it's a person who's your neighbour, your child's best friend, and your co-worker?
Well, that relies on them being your neighbour and your child's best friend, which is not going to happen. All right. The first thing to note over there, and back to why these kids are going to be discriminated, is, one, they just have dissimilar experiences. Two, I think there's very noticeable, observable changes within how they interact. Right. For example, a female Muslim student might wear a hijab. That is a clear target point. Or other similar religious symbols that they potentially use when they point to this public school or this multicultural environment. I think the first thing to note over here is, given the language that you will use, i.e., these schools are regressive, that these people are potentially regressive, because I don't see Geert Wilder saying, there's a very nuanced point about Islam and why Islam is problematic in certain contexts. I would probably think that he's probably saying Islam as a whole is problematic. These kids can't be allowed to be made terrorists into these schools. So I would potentially say that when you pick these kids up and push them to another school, they will be the target of a lot of discrimination, of a lot of bullying, of a lot of harassment. There's a couple of outcomes from this. One, I think learning outcomes is potentially false, because one, these kids do not feel safe within the classroom that they are, and they'll probably be constantly attacked and so on and so forth. But secondly, I would say that nobody really wants to make friends. I mean, you will probably make some friends. I grant that in some cases you might, but largely you will potentially stay with members within your own community anyways. If the LSE Open has to come up with an announcement saying, please don't hang around in these titles, then I would potentially say that these leagues would still exist in school as well, where South Asians or people from similar racial or religious backgrounds will be up together, which means that they are likely going to be a target of attacks. Multiculturalism contact maybe which they never proven openly anyways, doesn't really work, and I think that they will be subject to a lot of discrimination, which is a distinct impact on their learning outcome. But two, I think parents will also feel a lot more uncomfortable sending them or signing up to like trips, for instance, if they feel that their kids are going to an infidel school or a school that doesn't align with their values. There's not going to be you staying back for a debate class or a sports class if they feel that the more time you spend within the school, the further you get away from your religion. Which I think is an extremely problematic thing, because if you compare it, it's just great. The point of the matter is, for the state's social experiment, which is maybe we will have a multicultural society, you are putting the lives of children at risk, their educational outcomes at risk, the fact that they even go to school at risk for something that may or may not work. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is just with regard to the language that you will use. We know about these times matter, right? But I've already made the thing that you will probably need a lot of weighted language justifying policies to make it extremely unsafe for these minorities to hang out in public. You know, it's time that.
Okay, thank you very much for a fine speech. Next, I'd like the Deputy Prime Minister to continue in the case of the government side here.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Panel, I think that with faith-based schools, right? I think that you just get a lot more decreased level of tolerance. And I think that at the point at which you have like intolerance in a tolerant society, that society will become more intolerant. And I think if we prove that to, I think that we take this debate. I think that when OO's case, I think it mostly rests the biggest thing that I got from them was like the societal response coming from this, right? And note that like in society, I think in Western democracies, most people generally have like an understanding that religion is something that's very close to someone, right? And I think that actually, if the government wants to take a step to ban religions, I actually think in the short term, rather than this being just piling on, like towards like that religious group and like taking down that religious group, I think that you actually get more people who are like actually like, oh, like this is something maybe that the government's doing that's quite questionable. It's like maybe let me pay more attention to this religious group. Let me like actually see how like people that I know from this religious group are feeling about these types of things, right? I think that like extreme right-wing people that are likely to pile on into like to this religious group are like symmetric on both sides because those people are already tipped to like extremely like racist ideas and points. People like Bert Wilders, I don't think would get more racist if you now ban schools and give this like state like authority to be racist. I think that they are already racist, so I don't think people can answer. And I think what I'm going to go into is like the degree level of interpersonal relationships in these schools. But just rebuilding the characterization, I think that these schools have strong ties to religious communities because they often accept donations and are funded by like religious communities, right? And I think that there's a mechanism here because I think the people donating to these people are donating because they often have like strong beliefs that we need to spread these religions, right? And therefore they're doing in order to do this. And I think that then they require evidence and proof from these schools that are actually implementing, that they are actually implementing like these sort of the changes that they want to see. I think people in power, like Connor said, are already from like religious backgrounds. These like people, the principals, etc. Are like more likely to be from religious backgrounds. And I think that because of the fact that like these people are relying on donations, and because like most people here are biased towards religion, the ideas like that are like different from the main like religious ideas are like not as easy to process. I think what this leads to is like echo chambers, and I think that what like comparing this with normal like state schools, like non-state schools, I think you get like a lot less interpersonal relationships with people who are not from your religious like backgrounds. Note that no opposition told you that like actually like you don't even get this on outside the house. They try to paint you a picture of like someone wearing a hijab going to school and like basically having no friends, right? I think this is just untrue. I think this is like the most extreme like situation that you could possibly imagine. Is like when a black person from a religious minority goes to school and they have absolutely no friends. I think this is very extreme and maybe like the best case that they could take. But I think this is not representative. In most cases, I think in most cases, people from other religious backgrounds are welcomed into these non-faith-based schools. I think there's often things like group work, which you have to do with other people like from other faiths in the school, right? I think that it's also like the teachers there like will recognize that actually these people are from different religions, and if they're not getting on, they will like step in, like manage that a little bit more and make things a little bit better. Maybe they'll talk around classes with people, etc., to make things like a little bit better for these people. I think when you have more relationships with people from different religious backgrounds, you get actually more ability to connect with other people who are not just have your worldview, but who also have other worldviews. And I think this is really important because one day these people are going to actually leave these schools, right? I think they're going to step into the real world where they're going to be faced with like every single other person. And I think what this means is, I think this can be two things. So I think that because these people have gone to faith schools, they've not made a connection with other people who are not raised from their same faith. And I think that they don't have an experience connecting with people like that. They don't have an experience making friends or relationships with people like that. So I think what this means is they seek that out in their later life. They seek places of work or lifestyles and relationships that emulate that, right? And I think that then in which case because these are the only people they can actually bond with and actually understand where they're coming from. I think this is very foundational things such as what drives you, what motivates you as a person, and what morals you have, right? I think that people who go straight into schools and who don't see that actually all these other people have really valid moral basis as well, really struggle with that, so they're not going to form a deep connection with other people. No. I think that the other thing that can happen is if you don't get this connection with other people, what can happen is that you then find it very difficult to cope on your own because you feel isolated because you don't have these connections with people that you're used to connecting with, and you can't connect with these other people now because you don't have experience of that. Know that this school is really important to establish this, right? And I think what this can in a worst case mean is that people get really people who are isolated and who do not have experience connecting with people who are from other religions. Because they feel so isolated, they can in the worst cases feel more manipulated and co-opted by people who have extreme views online, which just kind of increases extremism, not saying in all cases, but in some cases. I think that it's a healthy closing.
If opening up are correct, and these religious communities tend to live in ethnic enclaves, then both arguments on top half are symmetric because you still probably won't have that much contact with people from outside the community.
I think you do get a lot of contact because I think most Western liberal democracies, in a school catchment area, you often there are not enclaves as such. They are even if they are enclaves, right? Because these people are minorities, you don't often get the entire school being literally based on that minority. You get an integration of different religious groups. I think what Opo said about state resources and curriculum, I think as I explained to you already, the curriculum is it is regulated in terms of GCSE and A-level, but all that is a lot more freedom. And I think that because of the metric of people being reliant on donations, there is an incentive to actually make the curriculum more religious. And I think even if you get more funding, there's an opportunity cost towards teaching them more religious things rather than practical things, which will further their economic output in the future of that individual and increase their ability. And I think because it's hard, we get much less contact, right? And I think what this leads to is on our side of the house, we actually get better inclusion with this group because there's much more contact with this group. And I think what this means is it's much easier for me to say that I will actually I will see where this person is coming from if I've grown up with someone that is a Muslim, someone that is a Jewish person, as opposed to if I've never seen or met that person and they've been in this other school this entire time. I think it leads a lot better.
Thank you very much for a fine speech. Next item on the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
I'll take a POI back right now. OG's claim goes as follows. The first thing they say is, we should do something that really fucks over minorities so people can be reflected and think about how much they're fucking over minorities. I am unclear why this happens. I'm unclear why the average third grader is going to be super reflective and analyze their emotions and think about where their perceptions and biases come from. The answer is they're probably not going to do this and just going to be they're different, bad, I don't want to interact with different or bad. So I'm unsure that they get any of the benefits that they talk about. But the second response / not really response to that is that these statements already racist. Therefore, this is not going to be called as racism. The problem was that they did not interact with Taha's analysis about how the state is likely to justify the policy, the language that they're likely to use, but also the way that the average individual, the average parent of a child in the school, is likely to respond to either the language that is used or the fact that there are a bunch of different students that are now interacting with their kids. The first thing I want to rebuild is this idea that the language that's going to be used is very, very provocative. And even if it's not intentionally provocative, it is necessary for the state to justify this stance very aggressively. This looks like saying it is absolutely necessary to ban this kind of religious institutions because the things they teach are bad. They are incapable of teaching science in a way that is secular. They are incapable of teaching English in a way that is bad. But they also have to justify why the religiousness of these schools is specifically bad, which means they're not likely to just stop at saying, there's going to be distractions when you're also teaching religion. They have to actively say that the intention of the individual within that religion, the intention of the elites, the intention of the teachers that are members of that religion is actively bad. If they do not care about the welfare or learning of these other students, and they just want to indoctrinate them. This means actively framing and acting as if these religions are inherently bad. And I don't think they ever explain to you why the way that they express or justify this policy is going to be any different. Which means that all of the harms that Taha tells you about the way ethnic minorities respond to this policy, but also the way that members of the majority respond to this policy still exists, and they're amplified when they don't prove to you why their position is going to change in the long term. Because all of that is contingent on them proving that students or adults are going to interact with this policy in a reflective manner, or that just being in the same space needs to interact better or care more about these individuals, which I don't think they ever do. A couple of responses beyond that. The first thing is on the quality of learning. I think Taha already explains to you why it's unclear that teaching is going to be different given it's a national curriculum. But just like an additional mechanism to this, which is if there's a national curriculum, students are being assessed within a national exam board or like a national test, which means their students have to meet the standard of learning, otherwise they get shit on. A lot of these schools are publicly funded, so they're probably already under a lot of scrutiny over the ability for them to produce students who are matching the performance of students in public schools. So it's unclear to me why they're not going to care about their students performing well, or why being in a religious environment is going to mean that they don't teach their students well. So I don't think the quality of learning goes down. But the second thing is this idea of teaching tolerance. And this goes both ways, right? Because the response we get from DPM is like, kids aren't going to get harassed all the time because they're different. But they're going to think they might get harassed. That's the problem. They don't have to get harassed every day. They might hear about a student in a different school that did get harassed. They might think that the person in their group is going to be mean to them, so they talk less. They ask less questions about things that are different to what they believe religiously. They talk less in class. They don't interact with teachers. Which means the quality of learning they get through their own participation in school gets much worse because they think that they are different or they think that they are perceived differently. And this is especially true because, again, the public rhetoric and conversation around this policy is going to prove to them that they are viewed and treated differently, that people don't want to respect their religious preferences, and that people don't care that they have religious preferences that are incompatible with the way that members of the majority behave. Closing. Okay.
Given that you agree that people they think of themselves as differently, they're less likely to interact with other people, then how are these religious people well equipped to enter society after they leave these faith schools?
Because right now we think we are different, but the state is okay with us being different. The state is letting us go to our religious communities. The state is letting us interact within a school environment that also respects the fact that I don't want to eat pork that much, that I don't want to eat beef, or the fact that I want to wear religious markers and I'm not going to get discriminated because of it. What changes is now you actively believe that the state and members of the majority don't care about your religious preferences. So even in their worst case scenario, maybe you don't interact every day with someone that's of a different religion, but you don't believe that members of a different religion hate you. You don't believe that members of a different religion don't care about the things that you are, the things that you care about within your religion. And this is important because the kind of argument we're getting from CO suggests that already that you interact with these enclaves and so it doesn't matter. But the difference is on their side. When you have this policy, you don't allow individuals to exist within safe spaces within these schools because they're going to be dispersed across multiple public schools within their catchment areas, which safe spaces within their community for people they can interact with. Maybe they get a few, but often what that means is they just interact with those few people because that's who they feel safe with. No. The second thing I want to talk about is this idea of what is school really for, and this is important. Because even if you believe that people don't face direct discrimination or children aren't going to face direct discrimination, the way parents allow their children to engage with education and with school becomes much, much worse. Because when you renege on the ability of parents to have choice or the values that are associated with what their kids are learning, they exercise control over other things. What extracurriculars they're able to do, what school trips they're able to participate in. If you're scared about your kids being able to tie a village garment or wear something on a school trip, you're not going to let them participate. If you're scared about them interacting with individuals of a different gender, you're not going to let them participate in an extracurricular activity. This means you take away parts of schooling that aren't just about the academic. You don't allow them to grow or develop as individuals, and that's extremely problematic. But the second thing is, they still support learning outside of school. So now you not only force them to experience discrimination and problems when they're like doing academics, but you add an additional burden, which takes away more time from them being able to participate in their academics. Because now they go to school from 7 to 5 p.m. and then from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. they're in their religion schools, which means I'm unclear that you actually change the extent to which they interact with religion outside their schools. So in cases where the religion themselves is problematic or indoctrinating people, there's no change. But you take away the ability of students to learn and feel safe and grow as people within their school communities for all those reasons and most.
Perfect. Thank you very much for a fine speech. Next, I'd like to invite the member of government to extend the case for the government. Here.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. I think it's going to be an issue with that there's no accreditation to get in that inclusive religious practices in contrast to your own classes, right? The fact is that when you implement inclusive religious practices, there are consequences that take form, let's say, bioethics. How do those come in within the context of a broadly religious curriculum, right? Things like evolution, do those get taught in a system where you're not discussing the same kind of like simple concepts of that happens within a religion? These are actively contrasting to you may teach in a religion. How does that work for a student who's developing at a fundamental age? What are they expected to believe when they're operating in two fundamentally contrasting systems of education and they're being told two opposing things by their teachers at the same time? How does sex ed work functionally within a religious school where they may actively condone discussions of those things? How does that work for students? It's not been met at all by any previous arguments. Now, we need to discuss as well that there's and fundamentally, if these things are done within a school, this is actually bad for students. If we're talking about whether or not they're going to be confused or whether they're not going to learn things that are fundamental things like evolution, maybe they need to be told that otherwise later. I think that it's often negated that students fundamentally just need that education, otherwise there are going to be more things like STIs and unwanted pregnancies. These are like things that are undoubted bad because we don't want them in society at large. Now, as far as religious acceptance from your community, there is that theoretically if you are in a sort of like a pocket of your community, right? What we didn't discuss though is the idea of this broadly religious field, right? The idea of ostracization of yourself or others. Now, what are the consequences of that? That you either within your adult life ostracize people who don't actually adhere to the same kind of religious practices as you. What are the negative ramifications of that? That you actually don't communicate with other people in the same way that you would others, right? And the ramifications of that is that you either are ostracizing yourself or you're ostracizing people of other communities, right? And you don't socialize with your peers. Say you're going out and meeting with your friends. You don't actually enjoy that activity in the same way that you would otherwise, right? You think it's something that's actively uncomfortable for you and it's like in some ways ostracizes you without even you needing, right? The idea that your friends broadly exist in broader society, or just are acting in the pubs, they're drinking, they're smoking, they're doing whatever. And you, within your religious mind frame, fundamentally think of your friends as the ramifications of this. Obviously, you feel ostracized in society because the average everyday person comes in as somebody that is not acceptable to you, as a person to condone or to communicate with. The ramifications of that you just don't feel accepted in society, and that you feel like everyone in society is actively seeking out to do things that are against your religion. So you think there is people that are not acceptable. And that's where the echo chamber problem comes in. The idea that you religious fundamentalism, which is overall bad because of the idea that you need to like then pigeonhole back into or borrow back into your community to find any kind of acceptance. This is not good because then you lose out on society at large and all the things you potentially benefit from like an entire range of society and broad benefit, right? Because it's not really good. I'll get into that later. But if they wanted a community or religion, this can happen independently. Right? Extra classes exist. You can be funded by the same groups that are funding these schools. And it doesn't make sense to have this be then again something that you have to like, have an entire system of education around later. Schools become theoretically more accessible. So schools become theoretically more accessible, like Catholic schools are already built that otherwise people not been able to attend or not been allowed to attend. People then are just allowed, people who have just succumbed to this version of education just because it's the closest school to them. That doesn't actually like function because you don't want like a kid who's maybe like of a different religion doesn't want to join the school, but then make it a massive track to a school that's not really acceptable to them. This is something that we fix on our house because we just have people who aren't then succumb to a religion or to like get an education that's convenient and geographically just near them. Right? When we're talking about a national curriculum, right? State schools actually actively when we're talking about like religious schools, they actively underperform academically. They do not study the full curriculum, and they are disadvantaged on top of being, say, a theoretical minority as discussed by previous speakers. In addition to not having, say, like a philosophy or policy level that actually contradicts things that are taught within their religious systems of education, right? That has negative ramifications also. Now, banning religious schools has connotations. Was a major part of my memo. The religious parents will be strict if you don't go to a very traditional school. That doesn't really stand. And the fact is that religious parents will be strict regardless, right? That's how strict parents fundamentally work. And putting in a traditional school doesn't make them not strict, which means that the school is strict for them. Sure.
Yeah, if these schools are echo chambers and produce intolerant and hateful students, so we got how to engage with broader society outside of this echo chamber. If that is true, then the conditions for current students in public schools logically have to get a lot worse because there's an influx of hateful, intolerant students.
No, I don't think that it works because they're like fundamentally intolerant students. The point is that they can be and they will fundamentally become intolerant of being in an echo chamber. I don't think that's like a ridiculous statement being made. It doesn't actively happen in the status quo. Now, the fact is that they argue that people get bullied for being different, as if that's not something that happens in the status quo, and it's like fundamental to human beings. Now, the fact that we should, because as a concept, we should just surround with people who are just like them also doesn't really make sense because again, that's not how you like throw away the human being. Kids care about like pretty basic stuff, like who can run with that. They don't actually conceive racism, who socialize them into it. That's gonna happen within these schools, and that's a negative ramification. We do not want to teach kids how to create like their own ontology of like racism. Right? The idea that secular science actively contradicts some aspect of religion is true. The idea that the best that we're teaching things in religion like the best way to go to abstinence or whatever. This is sort of nonsensical teaching that really come into play because it doesn't actually teach students how to do things. Right? Now when we're discussing how like there's like this idea of like internalizing love mythology within schools, right? If you're teaching religious things, it starts off things, like independent religious groups and then it becomes fundamental, right? Because we have far right teaching things like, oh, it may be wrong for you to be of your particular religious group, or it may be wrong for you to say be queer or be of your particular identity. This is wrong and it fundamentally ruins your perception of yourself, right? Religious groups isolated concentration and then see like 8% of the population define themselves in a specific community. The negative ramifications of they view themselves in a negative light, right? And when children implicitly define the person who, right, they lack agency and we have an obligation to them, right? We have to take care of our responsibilities to children because that's our fundamental responsibility as parents, right? The idea that if we do not do this, we are actually negating our responsibility to them is inherent, right? Because then when we talk about how, like, if you operate in a school, you don't experience bigotry. It's also like another fundamentally flawed case. Because it is that you still like live in the world, you still operate within society, you still have the internet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for my speech. Next, I'd like to let a member of Congress step in.
Wow, someone's getting intense. Yeah, true. I think the most important question to answer in this debate is what a successful educational system needs in order to function well. I think it needs three things. First of all, and most importantly, it needs high levels of funding. Because what you need to ensure is that schools across the board have lots of money they can use to give their students the best possible life. Secondly, they need quality teaching that is directly tailored towards the specific composition of the student body. And third of all, they need parental buy-in. And the case of opposing opposition is that you lose out on all of these. First of all, and most importantly, why do you lose out on a huge amount of funding? And the thing I want to challenge here is part that's kind of underlie the rest of the debate, which is that there aren't that many religious schools, it's kind of a marginal thing that you can get rid of. That is just patently false. Think of the number of Christian schools that exist in Western liberal democracies. Think of the power of the Catholic Church in Italy, or the evangelical movement in the United States, or the Church of England in the UK, that controls a solid 15 to 20% of all schools. And the burden on government benches to say that these faith institutions are now banned and are presumably going to be taken over entirely by the state sector. So it's not an insignificant number of schools that just belong to minorities. It is a decent chunk of schools that lose out as a result of this. And I would note that these institutions have a huge amount of capital they can donate. Opening government seems to accept this implicitly because they say that these institutions engage in a huge amount of donor movement. But also I would note that religious institutions have huge amounts of capital. The reason they have a captive supply base of people who genuinely believe their primary moral obligation is to donate to their religion, and so they're willing to donate as much money as possible. And religions on our side want to donate towards these schools because they want to influence the next generation to some extent. So, obviously then, there is a huge amount of funding in Western liberal democracies that comes entirely from religious institutions. And they won't fund anything on government side. Because you are literally telling these religious institutions they are extraordinarily biased, they don't know how to teach anything whatsoever, and they also, these religious institutions have outside options, things like Sunday schools and so on, which closing government seems to concede, so they will move their funding entirely towards that. Which means, on their side of the house, you lose out on a huge amount of funding that goes into schools that helps people.
Yeah.
Now, they will say, aha, but governments can pick up the slack. Here are many reasons why governments can't pick up the slack and why state school funding is relatively fixed. First of all, governments in the current economic environment face external pressures. They face high interest rates, they are unwilling to raise taxes because that's extraordinarily politically unpopular, and so they can't borrow or raise taxation, and so they can't put the money they need to into the educational system. But secondly, electoral incentives mean this is extraordinarily unlikely. Because there are loads of different issues that come up in a particular general election. You have to, education funding has to compete for priority against healthcare, against defense, against broad cultural issues. And what that means is that there's unlikely to be a relatively high increase of funding on their side. But thirdly, even if funding goes up for schools on government bench, that is likely to take a long time to trickle down into actual benefits of children, because the government has to create new levels of infrastructure and new schools and so on, and that takes decades. There's at the very least on their side going to be a generation of school kids who lose out on this level of funding, which is terrible, right? It means now the state sector is far less funded overall, and the government has to pick up the slack. What are the impacts of this? First of all, this hurts all children across the board. Because all the government funding now that goes primarily towards secular schools has to be spread across all schools, and we have shown that's extraordinarily unlikely. But secondly, I would note, a bunch of people from different groups lose out, because oftentimes these faith schools can be diverse because they have government quotas implemented to have a number of people coming who aren't from that minority, but also oftentimes the poorest and most vulnerable children are the ones who are going towards these schools, and they have the capacity to get a genuinely good education because the religious institution is funded now, and obviously the religious institution has an incentive to ensure the education is good and not just fund its own ideology, because parents also care about educational outcomes as well as religion, so the quality of these schools is likely to be relatively high, and there's a state-imposed curriculum there. Like guys, be realistic, JFS in the UK is the best state school in the country. Now, I would note, therefore, that funding is a necessary condition for any other impact in this debate. because you need money in order to hire the best teachers, in order to provide the best extracurricular opportunities, in order to make schools and children relatively safe. And insofar as they lose out on all of that, they cannot get ahead in this debate. Yes.
Look, there's not that much slack to pick up. These are not private schools. They're already funded to a significant degree by the state.
They're
And
not
they
funded to
convert
The
infrastructure.
whole point is that states can afford to not fund them to a significant degree, precisely because religious institutions are so willing to donate towards these causes. Alright, secondly, on tailoring. And I think that we've agreed at this point in the debate that the likely counterfactual is catchment areas that are somewhat diverse. Not perfect, but somewhat diverse. But the tailoring that you get in these secular schools to the needs of religious individuals is far worse. In a few ways. First of all, on our side of the house at religious schools, teachers are from the relevant religious community, versus on their side of the house they're externally imposed by the central state. On our side of the house, that means then teachers can relate far more to the student experience and can serve as role models, whereas on their side of the house they might be some white middle class guy who comes in and thinks he's going to teach in a state school and then he gets roasted by the students that they can trust in the school. Secondly, I would note, on terms of provisions, states, as I've explained already, schools have limited funding, so they can't provide everything to everyone. And so that means when you have a far more diverse school, not all students' needs will be met. Whereas on our side of the house, they will be. A Muslim school, for instance, can provide a prayer room to its students, it's really important. When that makes up the vast majority of its student body, they can't do that on their side when it's spread out. So schools end up being tailored in a far worse way. The last thing I want to talk about is parental buy-in. And opening opposition to their credit touch on this, but I think they impacted it just in terms of extracurricular effects. But I don't think that gets the scale of the problem quite right. Think about this. Parents care the most about their children. They think their main obligation in life is to give their children a good life. They also, in this debate, care deeply about religion, and they think that is the primary moral obligation they have. Now, they are being forced to choose between those things, and the state is telling them they can't have the best possible life for their kids because they can't have a genuine religious institution. And parents are obviously going to be extraordinarily alienated by this. It's not just about extracurricular effects. It looks like things like parents actively disagreeing with what schools are telling you down the line, or encouraging things like truancy, for instance, or taking towards Sunday schools that disagree with what has been going on in the school in general. So parental faith in the educational system reduces massively on their side of the house, and that is obviously terrible, all the effects it has on students and kids. At the end of the day then, all of the necessary conditions that are needed in order to have a successful educational system go away on the government bench, they are only achieved on our side. Very, very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for fine speech. Next, I'd like government whip to close advocate for the government.
I'll give you some reframing case, explaining why this deals with OG's vacuum ability to respond to power, directly clashing the materials of these ideas of contact theory, the response from communities, lastly we're trying to deal with CO and this idea of brand buy-in. Here's the piece of framing that's really important to this debate. Insofar as we really care a lot about these children from religious minorities, but also the religious children in danger, we think there's a piece of framing that's really important to understand about this. Is they don't choose the background they are born into. I, as a person, don't choose to be born into a gender, or an identity, or a set of appearance, or a background. I don't know whether I'm going to be born Christian, atheist, or Muslim when I'm born. I don't know if I happen to be born in a community in an area that means I'm sent to a standard school or a religious school. Moreover, these children aren't innately religious for the first few years of their life. Like, you can learn basic morality and basic logic like don't cross the road when the red light is red.
But it's hard to like ingratiate religious principles at a young age. Now he already explained this by explaining you aren't socialized when you're very young. You like act quite instinctively and impulsively. What is really important, and this is really significant to our case, is there are a huge amount of children in these religious schools who are maybe coerced into lifestyles that are inherently very religious, that like makes them have a difficulty in competing their life engaging in a secular society, but also engaging their life as a person who has different identity. We think like women in these religious schools are particularly vulnerable. We think those people are probably likely to engage in teachings that teach them the value of them like mothers and homemakers significantly more than like a child probably does in a state school that is actively trying to like increase women engagement in STEM. No, we tell them as well that like those teachings are innately biased by those teachings. Nobody ever tells you that like teachings are a priority is made to integrate religious teaching into the language of the curriculum. So no one may learn biology. We think it's mainly covered by the fact you always presented the alternative that like evolution isn't real, or like the insects and you should be abstinent and wait until you find one. Yeah, sure.
Doesn't all of this rhetoric prove exactly O's point, which is that the only way you can justify this is through extraordinarily powerful, harmful, and pernicious rhetoric, like religions are inherently regressive or something like this?
We don't think religions are inherently regressive. We think that being within a background of a faith school probably tends towards being more traditions. Look, religions are founded on like texts and like beliefs that are thousands of years old. But no, secondly, the people who are likely to teach in these schools are probably the strongest believers in those schools. We're both told by open government that intuitively understand you're someone who's grown up and lived your life in that religion, you probably buy into those religions fully. You probably significantly devour those religions. Thirdly, the echo chamber of being within an entirely religious community means that those beliefs probably are entrenched and liberalised significantly less than when exposed to being within a secular society. The next piece of framing that's really important to engage in is we also think that like it does create difficulties in your engagement with the other members of society in a way that like it delays the point at which you engage in this kind of theory. Nobody tries to do this by saying, oh, contact theory is a thing. Maybe people will be less racist to you because they meet you and go, oh, you're not the horrible, evil person that Farage describes. We think it's the secondary level, because notice that it doesn't take place in the vacuum of 1 or 2 years, but it's the next 30, 40, 50 years of this policy. Maybe sure, in the short term, you are like one of a few minority children at a school. But significantly, it is the years afterwards where every child goes to school from like 3 or 4 years old and makes friends with people from those communities, but those children aren't socialised fully. Similarly, those schools probably are prepared for an influx of religious minority children, so I'm prepared to like put measures in place to prevent bullying and harm, because I probably don't want to be the school that's known where like the children are fed to the wolves. But moreover, thirdly on that, we think these like religious donors probably care about these children being protected and put into a safe space, so probably do offer donations to offer these extracurricular classes and programs. I think it's probably likely that in the 2020s, that a state school that then now takes on significantly more religious children probably does just find a spare room that is like the prayer room at lunchtime. It's probably quite an easy like thing they can do. Here's the thing that OG misses, and we're going to engage with why there's a gap in that. Is they tell us there's like this echo chamber in these schools that just means teaching behind the times. But we think they miss a couple of engagements in terms of why these religious minority children actively suffer themselves by attending these schools, where they lack the consent to basically make decisions for themselves that mean they are actively harmed because they are trapped into a life of religion. No, we think like if you want to choose a life of religion, that's pretty valid. We think that like it's the choice and consent you give to do that's important. We think that the point at which you're taught and your life is 9 to 5, being taught religion and it's coded in everything you learn, you're never given the option to state that identity. That means probably like you always stay within these ethnic enclaves, you probably stay in similar communities, you probably don't have these diverse experiences. Because you'll probably fear the like response you get from external communities, some of which founded, some of which aren't founded, because you're always told this aggregator, there are other people who want to hurt you, there are other people who won't respect your beliefs like we do, but maybe you're never given that choice in the first place. That's the engagement we give you that means you take over OG. This also feels, yeah, sure.
Yeah, the one that government has not done is engage with our argument that provocative language will be used, and this means that the minorities affected are not just the kids in school.
Okay, I think sure, opening that up by not just the acting in just going to get to the reason like we think for society to be secular, cool, and on. But like Williams, we think like realistically, schools aren't going to do this and governments aren't going to do this. We think it's intuitively against their perspective to actively find ways to make these children targets. No, like religious communities are like large voting blocks insofar as like they care about the like interests of the communities, the areas they live in. Secondly, the fact we're told they're ethnic enclaves means they have like a large concentration of votes. We think intuitively like sacrificing entire voting blocks is probably a way to lose elections and lose huge levels of votes by. We think it actively goes against incentives. Politicians probably don't want to lose 15 to 20% of the population just to appease a few races. Particularly like half of these governments are probably liberal in nature themselves, so probably aren't trying to appeal to far right. That's not parental buy-in. Again, Xiong tried to bring this later on, and like, sure, like we think there's some level of parental buy-in. We're willing to concede this. We think that's okay. Firstly, one, deal with it, those parents have to send those kids anyway. Two, years afterwards, they get used to sending their kids to those schools, and other parents start having kids, and they like always accept that you send your kids to state schools. Now, I think that the children have that option to engage with religion or not. It's significantly more important than the parents buying up and saying this child isn't learning to go out of religion. For those reasons, CG for the win.
Okay, now you're going for a fine speech, Nick. Like, what the opposition would propose the case for the opposite side of the debate is an open here.
Okay.
There's a reason why the government did not respond to our case on funding. It's like the entire time responding to the program. And it's not because we're out of the debate. It's because it is far easier to make very logical, very fair pushbacks to the relatively extreme characterization of open position than it is to focus on the more tangible issue in the debate. It is very easy for the government to say, for example, that not all of these states are racially racist, which might take up significant amounts of states, but does not take out a single impact that we put in around. It is far easier to say, for example, that maybe we could have a career route in an education system, even in secular education, but it is hard to take out that when you have less funding for the schools in the first place, you are even more resource constrained to meet the needs of diverse students, whether they choose to go to trade school or not. That is why our case is more important. And I'm going to explain this in two ways. Firstly, why funding in and of itself is the most important thing in the debate, why it does have a margin in the debate, despite the big protestations of the gov teams. But secondly, even if funding is not the most important in the debate, why we have more valuable contributions to the opening opposition on the integration of religious minorities into society. Firstly, on funding, the first thing I want to do is talk about scale. Because here's the thing. Religious minority schools are amazing. We agree with opening opposition. I think it's great that we have Jewish faith schools that are potentially funded by the state and Muslim faith schools that are potentially funded by the state. But the vast majority of faith schools in Western liberal democracies are Christian schools. And the reason why that is the case is because of the number of followers in these countries, in addition to the historic ties to the state that these dioceses have had with the government. So the reason that we put religious minority schools in the first place is because people noted that there were so many Christian schools, and we should tailor things to religious minorities like opening opposition suggested. This means something very important to the debate. The vast majority of schools that we are going to be banning are Christian schools, and that's two implications. Firstly, when opening opposition talks about how the messaging which necessitates the ban of these schools has to be extreme and has to target religious minorities, this is unlikely to be as extreme or unlikely to be true. And this is not a knife, it's just observing that given that the vast majority of these schools are Christian, that you have to act Christian people who are the modal majority in these countries. Secondly, and more importantly though, the amount of funding lost in the system is huge because these schools are funded to a significant or at least to a reasonable extent by these dioceses, by these various organizations, by the mosque, by the synagogue organization. They try to minimize this on government by being like, but obviously these schools get part funding and therefore that means there's no shortfall. We have two integrated responses in Aniket but no bother to track. Number one, given that opening government's argument relies on these donations being large in order to have influence, but opening opposition points out that regulation exists and therefore that constrains the ideology which is given in these schools, opening government's main premise that these schools get large donations still exists, but by their own logic, they get huge amounts of funding. But secondly, just thinking about this intuitively, the mission of these religious schools is often to help to prioritize the education of poor children so that they can access the things that richer children will not be able to because it's often in their mission statements, it's often in their values, which is why the vast majority of these schools have some state funding, but they give specifically to the type of poor kids who would have to go into the state sector if it were the case that these schools were banned and if these schools were taken over. This funding shortfall cannot be ignored because it is the most important thing to pay. It affects the types of teachers you get, it affects the quality of teachers you get, it affects the number of resources you have, it affects the number of enrichment opportunities open to these kids in the first place, which is also why we outweigh OO. Because yes, maybe some parents will opt out of extracurriculars in secular school, but you know what's worse? When there are less extracurriculars in secular school because it affects every kid regardless of if they are religious or not. If it is true that losing out on enrichment is a bad thing, and that is literally the sole impact of their parental buy-in argument, then surely it's far worse when every or more kids have constrained options in terms of their extracurriculars. They never explain why Muslim kids losing out on extracurriculars is worse than everything else. We explain why more kids lose out on those opportunities, more kids lose out on that inspirational teacher, or that extra course that allows them to go and be socially mobile. This is far more important. And just to think about the logic of our arguments, we think that under the status quo, there are huge incentives for religious institutions to part fund this education. They, for example, get institutionalization and legitimacy because they are able to integrate themselves in the state institution. They get potential youth pipelines when they do things like community services. They might get a future priest in their state school, for example. They get enhanced buy-ins from religious communities because they're far more likely to go to church or go to the synagogue when that same synagogue or church is funding the school that their kids are at in the first place. But they are not likely to do that if the school is not faith-based and it was that marginal shelter that meant that funding was lost. I want to now interact this with the rest of the debate. Firstly, let's talk about opening government. Opening government and to some extent closing government have two main contentions. One, you get less diversity, and two, the values and beliefs in these schools are wrong. Firstly, on diversity. One, religious schools are likely to be more ethnically diverse because ethnic minorities are far more likely to be religious. Two, the government alternative is likely local catchment areas, which means that you are likely to get the same obligation of ethnic enclaves that opening opposition identifying their framing them to try and backtrack on when they say, oh, but you're going to have people dispersed in the catchment area. If it is true that these are ethnic enclaves, you are far more likely to have undiverse schools anyway. Finally, especially Christian public faith schools often have minimum other quotas for other people, so these students benefit from higher education quality too. Opening governments.
Our arguments are not relying on these donations being significant because principal governors, etc., will not want to give up donations even if they do not need these to functionally operate the schools.
Sure, but I think the point is that they have no incentive to fund them. That funding shortfall is important in the Sorry. Then secondly, on values and beliefs, I think opening opposition have already explained that the fact that we have regulation takes up the vast majority of the arguments. We explain why that regulation allows these faith schools to exist. However, the delta when you ban them is that you get that funding shortfall. Finally, opening opposition. First thing to note is that the nature of their impacts are that there are attacks on the majority, that parental engagement is down, and that these schools cannot tailor to students in the secular model. Firstly, given CG's pushback that there are reasonable adjustments that schools can be made, the marginal delta then becomes funding and the capacity to meet the needs of everybody. Secondly, and more importantly though, I think that Aniket was raised that there be types of adjustments that are going to be made in the minority schools. All open opposition say is now you can get a school that doesn't serve you, that tells you halal food or doesn't serve you pork. We talk about university, we talk about the types of teachers that you are likely to get, which is also linked to funding. Everything comes back to money. We get more money, we get better education for more kids. We believe the thing.
Okay, thank you very much for a fine speech, for a fine debate. Go ahead, shake hands, have conversations with employee, and hopefully within 15 minutes. Thank you very much. I'd ask you guys to come your notes, take a few minutes, and if you can kind of figure out a call, you know, what before if you feel something is uncertain.